Good evening, everyone. My name is Margaret Wyatt from Milford, Massachusetts, M to the fourth, okay? And I'm here to introduce Dr. Darrow. Full disclosure is that I've not yet met him. However, our little local chapter of the Hearing Loss Association will be sponsoring him for a similar talk in September in Northborough, Massachusetts. And what we're trying to do is, as a chapter of the Hearing Loss Association, get the word out that you do not have to live in isolation. And this title of his book is Stop Living in Isolation. I've worn hearing aids since I was age 30. I'm now 60. And there's a lot of isolation feeling. The last time I was at my bad audiologist, I asked her for help. I said, I feel lonely. I want to meet other people that are suffering from hearing loss. And she told me that there was nothing out there. And I was very sad and felt even more isolated. I Googled what to do about it, and I did, in fact, find Hearing Loss Association of America. So it's a wonderful organization. We have a local chapter. We are volunteers. We're a nascent group, very small. But the big thing is we're trying to get the word out, and we're sponsoring programs like Dr. Darrow. We're developing a relationship with Southborough Library, so we'll actually have an event here in November as well. I'm really looking forward to that. I've left hanging around two handouts. The blue one is our little local postcard and has a URL, and you can go to it and read about us, and there's an email, and you can get on the mailing list. And the mailing list will allow you to learn about all of our events. We usually have about 4 or 5 a year, not many. Every single event is includes captions, all open captions, so that you can read them. And then also the national group, Hearing Loss Association of America. Highly recommended, $35 a year. We get no kickback. We just like to get the word out, basically. And so I'm very thankful that Dr. Darrow is in the Worcester area, and really looking forward to this talk because of this, stop living in isolation. I can totally respect that, and I've been there, done that. I'm not in isolation anymore. He has huge amounts of credentials, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but he is the Director of Audiology Research at Hearing and Balance Centers of New England, and there's a fantastic handout here. If you haven't received it yet, please feel free to come up and get it. He has a PhD in Speech and Hearing Bioscience and Technology.
Something like that. Way
beyond my pay grade, but I'm thankful for people like him who are studying and learning this so that he can help people like me. A couple of other things. He's a research associate in the Eaton Peabody Lab of Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary, which I know a lot of people use those, and they're highly, highly respected in the field. Professor of Hearing Science, Audiology, Research and Assessment, and Treatment of Balance Disorders at Worcester State University, which has a tremendously strong program. I'm aware of that. So, and it goes on, and I'm sure it's all in the handout here as well. So please help yourself to everything that's here, and I'll pass the microphone over to Dr. Darrow. Thank you very much.
So, let me ask, are we okay? Do we want microphone or not microphone? Does it matter?
No.
She says microphone in the back, so we're gonna go with microphone. Okay, all right, sounds good. I'm okay with that. So one thing I have to try to do is not walk in front of my own screen. I do it all the time, so I will try not to. I appreciate that introduction, and I really appreciate everything that the Hearing Loss Association of America does for people that are living with hearing loss. So I have been studying hearing loss and the impact on the brain, the impact on people. I have been actively involved in studying hearing loss for over 20 years, and in many different facets. And so that's probably what I think was trying to be summarized is, yes, I have a lot of credentials, but I do a lot. And so yes, I have a private practice that I work with in Worcester, the Hearing and Balance Centers of New England. Actually, I timed it tonight. It took me 25 minutes to get here. I had no idea how long it was going to take, so it wasn't that bad. I live north of Worcester, so this being south of Worcester, I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but not so bad. So I also am a professor, tenure professor at Worcester State University. I've been there for about 8 years, going into my 8th year. And I also do trainings and teach audiologists around the country about this very topic, hearing loss and cognitive function, and how the two kind of go together. As a society, we all seem to have this premise of hearing loss is one of those things that just happens when you get older. It's normal for my age. That's one of the my favorite things that a patient will say to me. Oh, okay, doc, so you tell me I have hearing loss. Is that normal for my age? There's no such thing. There is no correction factor for age. You either have normal hearing or you have hearing loss. You either have diabetes or you don't. You either have cancer or you don't. It might be more common, but that doesn't make it normal. And so I've been out on the road for the past couple of years actually giving talks just like this. And it's been everywhere from Southborough, Massachusetts, to LA, to Texas, South Dakota. I have seen a lot of this country, which has been great, although sometimes it's fly in and fly out. But I've got to see a lot of this country, and more importantly, I got to meet a lot of people. I sound like a politician now. But I got to meet a lot of people, and what I realized is that it didn't really matter where you were from. It didn't matter if you were from LA. It didn't matter if you were from Texas. If you had hearing loss, you had the same questions. And if you have concerns of cognitive decline and dementia, you have the same questions. And so what I did about, I think we're almost at about a year now, I decided finally, after a friend kept pushing me, he said, why don't you put this all down, put pen to paper, all the questions you get from people, and why don't you write a book? And I said, I'm not going to write a book. I never even dreamed of writing a book. He said, just write it down. How about this? I'll take care of it for you. You write it down. Took me 6 days to write the entire book. It all just came out of me. I handed it over. He gave it to the publisher. Next thing you know, within 30 days, it was then published. What really struck me was that within the next 30 days, so from the day it hit Amazon.com, within the next 30 days, it first became a #1 new release and then rose to a #1 bestseller. And I don't take any credit for that. What that tells me is that, yes, there are 40 million people living in this country with untreated hearing loss, and they want answers to their questions. They are worried. They are concerned. They know that hearing loss will happen, but they don't know what happens if they don't treat it, and they sometimes don't know where to start. Let's be honest. If you're of age, about 60 to 62, somehow, as soon as you have that birthday, your mailbox gets filled with solicitations for hearing aids. And I think that actually paralyzes people into inaction because you don't know what to do. You don't know who to trust. You don't know who the right person is. You don't know who's in it for the right reasons. Within the field, when you consider medical conditions, hearing loss is actually one of the top-rated untreated medical conditions. Yet, it's #3 on the list of Health and Human Services, the federal department, as the 3rd most common chronic disorder affecting seniors. 40 million people living with untreated hearing loss. What I'm trying to do, the reason I travel the country, the reason I'm here tonight is I want to educate more people on the unintended consequences of not treating hearing loss. I want people to understand that while you do have the option to not treat your hearing loss, you also need to know what it means and what impact that may have on your overall life. And so at first, we were introduced to the psychological consequence of living with untreated hearing loss, which is that isolation, that depression. And I appreciate that personal story that was shared with us. I've heard that story 1,000 times, and I'll review some of the literature that shows that this isn't anecdotal. This is real scientific evidence that people with hearing loss suffer more from social isolation and depression. And some of the new research that's coming out finding that untreated hearing loss increases the risk of dealing with cognitive decline and dementia. And so for the talk tonight, anybody that comes, it's funny, Ryan, the library director, said, I'll set you up a little booth so afterwards you can sell your book. And I said, ooh, maybe I should sell it. That'll pay for dinner tonight on my way home. But truth be told, I told my publisher a long time ago that go ahead, do what you want, sell it on Amazon.com, give me my $1.50 every time somebody buys it, or whatever it is. More important to me is that when I go out and I speak in public forums, give me copies of the book so I can give it out, so I can get the word out. And so everybody here will get a copy of the book tonight. So there is no selling of the book here. You're welcome. I have 3 goals for tonight. One is essentially a quick review of how we hear. Number 2 is how hearing loss impacts cognitive function. So this concept that hearing loss affects the brain has been around for a long time, but the studies really only started coming out about 5 or 6 years ago. And when they first came out, they were everywhere. The Today Show, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Charlie Rose did a full episode on hearing loss and its impact on cognitive function. It was a really big thing. Unfortunately, as you know, our country seems to have, especially the media, has the attention span of a fly, and so it's been long forgotten. And so I'm out there on the road trying to make sure that people still have this information. And then my third goal will be to talk to you about some of the new treatment options that are available for people living with hearing loss. So we all seem to know somebody who's got a little bit of a horror story about traditional hearing aids. And so what I'll talk to you about is the new science that's out there about some of the new treatment methods that are proven to improve cognitive function, reduce the risk of falls, increase quality of life, et cetera, et cetera. So those are kind of my 3 goals tonight. I guess I would turn to you and I would ask you a simple question, which is, why are you here? What was it about the flyer, about the sign outside, about an email that went out, however it was that you found out about this, what was it that made you say, I'm going to put aside my Thursday night and I'm going to come and listen to this guy? Anybody willing to share? Yes?
Well, I'm hearing impaired myself, and I found that I fell in love with ASL, and so I think that I'm going to be getting a degree in deaf studies. So I'm currently, well, I'm hard of hearing myself, and I fell in love with ASL, and, you know, I want to do, like, deaf studies.
Okay.
So I thought I would get more educated.
Thank you.
So thank you.
So ASL, American Sign Language.
Yeah.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. Anyone else care to share? If you don't want the mic, that's okay. Yes?
No mic.
No mic. All right, fine.
I spent the weekend at a wedding, family wedding, and shared a bedroom with my 87-year-old mother, and have not slept in a bedroom with my mother for, 35 years, a zillion years. So I didn't realize how profound her hearing loss was until she said, I'm taking them out now. Anything after this, I won't hear you. And she was right. But I never thought about it, about her and her balance. And when I saw this flyer about the brain and the balance and the hearing and isolation, it just put a whole new thought process in my mind of how much are we missing about my mother's world.
Yeah, yeah. So good. Yeah, you want to learn more about it. That's great. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Yes.
I think you hit some of it, of getting all the brochures in the mail for hearing aids. And so I think we've been talking about where do you start. And I got Lyme disease about 4 years ago, and I lost hearing in one side.
Okay.
And so my wife did some research. She came up with your name, and then we found out you were speaking. So we
Great.
decided to come.
So I just want to repeat that, make sure everybody heard it. So don't know where to start. And actually, I start the book with the top 5 reasons people stay away from the audiologist. And one of them is that because you get overloaded with advertisements for something that you have to go in and buy. And that feeling of, is this really worth it? What do I do? And am I going to get sold something? And so you don't know where to start. There's also a chapter in the book all about unilateral hearing loss and how to treat that and some of the new options. And by unilateral, I mean one side that's okay and one side that's pretty bad. And so there are new treatment options available for that where people get back to 360 degrees and they get more of that surround sound hearing, more clarity, more reduction of background noise. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Anyone else? No? Okay. So let me start with this quote. Ever since I read this quote, I promised myself I would start every single talk with this quote. It's pretty powerful. Everyone knows someone who's a cancer survivor, but no one knows an Alzheimer's survivor. So why would I even start my talk with that? So I'll let the cat out of the bag now before I pull up the graph in 10 minutes. Hearing loss increases the risk of developing dementia by 200 to 500%. And so in my world, we're no longer just talking about hearing loss. We're no longer talking about getting older and having to just put on hearing aids. We're now talking about the role of hearing loss and its impact on your cognitive function. We're talking about technology that can restore auditory stimulation to bring the brain back online and reduce the risk of developing dementia. A study came out about 9 months ago, found that the early treatment of hearing loss is the single most modifiable factor for preventing dementia. Number 1 on the list. And unfortunately, there is not a single, not one, not a single FDA-approved drug for the treatment of Alzheimer's or dementia. Not one. So you might have heard, you might have seen the headline back in, I think it was December, Pfizer. So you've heard of Pfizer? They make the pills, they make the prescriptions, right? Pharmacy. In December, after spending $360 billion and 20 years of research on dementia, they closed the entire unit. They just fired everybody and said, we're done. That's it, we give up. After 20 years, now they're a pharmaceutical, they are responsible to their shareholders and their board of directors. And let's be honest, if you ran a business that you spent $360 billion trying to study something, and after 20 years you had zero to show for it. Like, I'm not exaggerating, they had nothing to show for it. They said, that's it, we have to make a business decision, and they closed it down and just overnight, just closed it and said, that's it, we're done. We are out of the dementia business. We can't win this. And so there is one thing you can do. There's one way to treat dementia: prevention. It is the only thing available to us. So it's a great study that came out from the European Dementia Commission all about lifestyle factors for preventing dementia. and I already alluded to it, but number one on the list was the early treatment of hearing loss. And so we'll dive into some of that data as we go. So let me show you something. I have here a picture of an umbrella. And if you ever look up on Google dementia, you'll see pictures of umbrellas. Anybody know why? Any guess? So dementia is the sort of big picture word. And underneath the umbrella, there are different types of dementia. So, I remember early on learning about this. One of my questions was, well, what's dementia and what's Alzheimer's? Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. There are many forms of dementia. 50%, so half of all cases of dementia are Alzheimer's. Then the other 50%, there's several different types. There's Parkinson's related, Lewy body related. There's all sorts of types. But regardless, no matter which one you're talking about a significant decline in cognitive function, severe enough to really interfere with daily life. And so I want to cover something, though, because there's a lot of people that walk around very worried about, am I going to deal with dementia? So let's cover for a little bit what is dementia and what is not dementia. What is a significant decline in cognitive function versus what is everyday forgetfulness? So here's an example. Actually, already, I don't even know where my car keys are. They're probably in my backpack. Show of hands, who here has misplaced their car keys? Okay. Who here has gone to the mall, Christmas shopping, you're there for 3 hours, you walk out, and you can't remember where you put the car, right? I mean, I know it happens to me. So I teach at Worcester State. Wednesdays, I teach from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m., 12 hours with tiny little breaks. I don't have a clue where my car is after 12 hours. Thank God they have the little alarm button, so now I can set the alarm off and then I can go find it, right? So I forget where my car is. And my personal favorite is always the, who here has gone to the kitchen? You go in, you open up the refrigerator door and you think, what am I doing here? I forgot why I got up, right? We're all guilty of these things. But the good news is none of those are signs of dementia, right? I do all three of those things all the time, and I swear it's just my stress, right? But I'll be honest with you. Am I worried? Yes. Am I worried about dementia? Am I worried about being a statistic? So let me tell you a story. My grandmother lived till 93 years old, physically, mentally, cognitively. She lived till about 83. She actually fit the statistic perfectly. So the statistics with dementia are your physical body lives 10 years beyond your mental capabilities. It's pretty scary. So up until about 83, every day, drank a 6-pack of Coors Light, smoked I know that look of, really? Smoked a full pack of filterless cigarettes every day and was never sick. So she was just one of those, was never sick, never in the hospital, never even had a cold. But at 83, the hearing loss, the visual loss, and the cognitive decline set in really rapidly. And so for the next 10 years, while she was physically on this planet, she was living in utter isolation. The depression kicked in, the dementia got worse. It was like the snowball. It just kept growing and growing and getting worse and worse. And there we were, that by the end, and by the end I mean especially the last 5 years, it was basically a shell of a body. And it was the saddest thing to witness. And so yes, I'll admit to you, I'm scared of it. I think it's the scariest thing out there, especially when you consider that A, there's not a single FDA-approved drug for it. B, there is not a major pharmaceutical company on this planet doing research for it. I think A and B says enough to sort of scare you into, gee, when I forget things, is this cognitive decline? Like, what's going on here? But those three simple examples, don't be too worried about. Now, if somebody hands you a set of keys and you're kind of holding them and you don't know what to do with keys, now you're in trouble. If you get in your car, so you leave them all, you get in your car, and you don't remember how to get home to the house you lived in for the last 35 years, now you should be worried. And do you know that people living with dementia unfortunately die every day from chewing and swallowing issues? So there's a disorder called dysphagia, difficulty chewing and swallowing. People with dementia forget how to chew and swallow. That basic feature that we've been doing our whole lives, you start to forget how to do it. And so you aspirate, you get food and liquid in your lungs, you leave pockets of food, right, back here in your cheeks, and it sits there and it gets infected. Dysphagia, as a result of dementia, is very common, which can then kill you. So people die of dementia and dementia-related diseases and comorbidities every day. It's very sad. So from a definition perspective, dementia is defined as a decline in mental ability severe enough to interfere with daily life. So that's why forgetting where your keys are not a big deal. Forgetting how to get home, that's interfering with daily life. And dementia diagnosis comes from having difficulty with at least two of these primary core functions, these core cognitive functions. The first one, memory. So let me do a little example for you. And this is probably common sense, right? Okay. I want you to remember these numbers. 4, 5, 8, 7, 3, 2. Did you get those numbers? So did you hear all the numbers? No. So how could you remember them? If you have hearing loss and you're not treating it, and you don't hear everything, how could you possibly be expected to remember things? So it's actually a very obvious connection. If you don't hear well and process everything that's said to you, you can't possibly remember it. Communication and language. Hearing is 50% of the communication equation. I think that makes sense, right? Ability to focus and pay attention. So by an honest show of hands here, who has been to a restaurant or perhaps at a wedding or a family gathering, and when there's a lot of people talking, you find it's very difficult to follow the conversation? Number one sign of hearing loss, difficulty hearing and background noise. And we'll talk about why that happens, because there's a processing disorder that comes along with age-related hearing loss. So we all think, oh, I'm just getting old, I'm losing my hearing. No. You're developing a processing disorder. You're developing a progressive degenerative disorder that's not feeding your brain information, and so you lose the ability to focus and pay attention. You lose that filter. So hearing's involved with all three of those. Reasoning and judgment, visual perception, not sure if you knew that one, but untreated vision loss is a significant risk factor for developing dementia and cognitive decline also. Yet, as a society, let's be honest, over 50% of the people here have glasses on. Why? Because you woke up one day and you're like, I can't read this. I gotta go get glasses. Yet you go to a restaurant and you'll say, you know, I had a real hard time following that conversation. It must be that the background was really loud. Must be poor acoustics. We'll blame it on anything but our own ears, and we'll live in denial, and we won't seek treatment, and then we put ourselves at risk for other major medical disorders. So let me tell you the history of how hearing loss got linked to all this stuff I just told you about dementia and cognitive decline. So here was the first study, hearing loss and cognition in the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging. So this was a very, how do I put it? There were thousands of people around Johns Hopkins University. They took thousands of people from across the country, and they studied aging. They followed them for 50 years. They wanted to know everything from toenail fungus to male balding patterns. They studied everything. How do we as human beings age? And what are some of the trends to look for? From that study, the most powerful finding was that hearing loss, depending on degree, increases the risk of developing dementia by as much as 200 to 500%. So even people with mild hearing loss, and one of the chapters in the book, a mild hearing loss is a major problem. If I could go back in time and figure out who came up with the word mild, I might kick them in the butt, right? Because mild implies, well, it's not that big a deal. I am actually trying to push for us to start staging hearing losses as we stage other medical disorders. So stage 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. Haven't completely worked it out. But even a mild hearing loss, and here's the truth. Everybody on this planet, every mammal on this planet is going to suffer from age-related hearing loss. It's in our genes. We can't avoid it. The question is, will it happen when you're 80 or will it happen when you're 60? And there's a lot of factors there. So is it in your genes? If your mom and or dad started suffering from hearing loss when they were 60, chances are it'll probably happen to you then also. But if you mix in that you worked in a factory, you went to a lot of loud concerts, well, that noise exposure will actually take whatever age it was supposed to start out and bring it down by 5 to 10 years. And then there's people who medication impacts hearing, Lyme disease, so there's other diseases that directly impact hearing. But no matter what kind of hearing loss you're dealing with, you are at an increased risk of developing dementia if you're not treating it. So this was the first study. But I would never stand up here and tell you about one study. There have been 23 studies since then. This is since 2011. 23 studies. I clipped 2 more titles. Hearing loss and cognitive decline in older adults, hearing loss and incident dementia. So that's 3 out of the 23. And they all show the same trend. The data is near identical in all 23 studies that untreated hearing loss increases the risk by as much as 200 to 500%. It is a major, major risk factor. And so to support this, and I love this, so there's an Alzheimer's Association in Worcester. And what I've heard from a number of patients and colleagues, if you walk into that office seeking services, the first question they ask you, have you had your hearing tested? Because they've caught on, the Alzheimer's Association of America has caught on to how important it is to identify hearing loss and treat it as early as possible. So I kind of let this one out of the bag already, but I'll do this as a trivia. The number 1 cause of hearing loss is aging. Typically, people start shouting out noise and all sorts of things, living in complete denial that it's not aging. But it is. Aging is the number 1 cause of hearing loss. Then there's noise exposure. Then there's medication. And then there's all these other comorbid factors. So did you know that diabetes increases the risk of developing hearing loss? It doubles your risk. Cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, thyroid disease, cancer. Most major medical conditions increase your risk of developing hearing loss, which therein increases your risk of cognitive decline and dementia. And so I want to show you here. And for the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk to you about what happens with a mild age-related hearing loss. Forget moderate, severe, severe, profound. We're going to start with a mild hearing loss, and I'm going to show you how detrimental that can be to your brain and your cognitive function. So here's a basic hearing test. This is only part of what we do. We do a full cognitive assessment at our practice too. On this scale, we have volume, soft to loud, and here we have tone, low tone to high tone. So you know, beep, 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 or ah, a, e, o, oo. I'm sorry. But anyway, this is a first for me. And it's being filmed for TV. That's great. All right. Note to self, don't touch the screen. Vowels on the left side, consonants on the right. And I won't touch the screen again, okay? Red is right and blue is left. This isn't a political picture, right? There's no political leanings here. So what you're looking at this number 20, anything above it is considered normal hearing. Anything below it is considered hearing loss. And what typically happens with age-related hearing loss is it starts with the higher pitched tones. But what does that really mean? Let me translate this into a symptom. I can hear you, but I'm not understanding every word you're saying. I hear that you're talking to me, but I feel like I've lost the clarity. And I'm not sure, did you just say he or she, or C or T or tree or C or me or fee? So you get the vowel every time. You know people are speaking, but you lose the clarity. And one of the problems with traditional hearing aids is they make everything louder. This person doesn't need volume. This person needs clarity. And new technology is specifically aimed at restoring clarity. So if you look at this picture, basically you can't hear anything in gray. So you can hear vowels, but guess what? You're going to miss a lot of the consonants. And so what do? Here's my favorite. Patients say this to me all the time. Give me a second. Let me put my glasses on so I can hear you better. Does that make any sense? No. But in a way it does. Because what are they doing? They're filling in the missing pieces. They want to subconsciously read my lips. They want to try to fill in the missing information. And so we work harder to hear, okay? So let me show you something. I want to show you this image. I took a very simple approach at stylizing the connections of the ear to the brain. So you see there are 6 bright arrows connecting the ear to the brain. This is the normal way. There's actually millions of nerve fibers that connect the ear to the brain. But I'm going to whittle all millions down to just these 6. And I want you to tell me what happens to the aging brain with hearing loss. So how would you describe these neural connections here? What just happened here? Half of them went away, and
They're not as bright.
right. There's a quantitative reduction and a qualitative reduction. So when you're not treating your hearing loss, you're losing neural connections every day in the brain. And the ones that do remain are not as active. And you've all heard the expression, use it or lose it. There's nothing more true in our neural system than use it or lose it. And so here again, here's that normal connection, bright, vibrant, millions of connections. With age-related hearing loss, we lose a quantitative amount, and qualitative, they're not working as hard. So how could you possibly catch every word, catch every sound? How could you possibly filter what you want to hear when you're in background noise? It gets very, very, very difficult and very taxing on the brain to do those things. And so let's connect for you. I want to try to connect the dots of how hearing loss and dementia come together. And there are 3 working theories. And I'm betting the farm that it's actually a connection of all 3, that they'll never whittle it down to just one or the other. Let's start with social isolation. We know that's a risk factor for developing dementia. And we know that hearing loss increases social isolation. I want you to read this quote. So Helen Keller, she was both deaf and blind. Here's her quote. Blindness separates you from things. Deafness separates you from people. This whole talk was started with, because of my hearing loss, I was being separated from people. I was living in isolation. That's why I named the book, Stop Living in Isolation. Because I've heard those stories from my patients here in Worcester. to people all around the country telling me about how hearing loss is impacting their social life. Is there real science to back this up? You bet there is. I actually went back in time and I got a clipping of the first study that came out, Hearing Impairment and Social Isolation in the Elderly, 1983. There's been about 48 studies on this since then, all showing the same thing. Here's another one. Hearing impairment and lower levels of physical activity in older adults. So we physically do less when we have hearing loss, and we socialize less. Two very, very, very bad things for active aging. To stay active, to stay involved. It's hard to do those things if you're staying at home and you're not staying active. Let's talk about reason number 2, hearing loss and dementia are connected. Cerebral atrophy, which is a really fancy word for brain shrinkage, okay? So I showed you sort of a cartoonized version before, but there is actually a very significant loss of nerve cells in the brain when you have hearing loss. Is there evidence for this? Yes. So here's the study, it came out 2 years ago. Association of hearing impairment with brain volume changes in older adults. I don't know why scientists can never just get to the point and tell you the actual result in their title. Then you got to go digging. But I'm going to show you a picture. You know, they say a picture says 1,000 words, right? The brain on the left is a 68-year-old female with a mild hearing loss. The brain on the right is a 68-year-old female with normal hearing. You see a difference? Pretty sure you could go out to that parking lot and see a difference, right? It's pretty staggering. So this is one of the pictures from that study. I mean, to me, this picture truly does say 1,000 words. This picture shows you what is happening to the brain. There's as much as a 40% reduction in brain volume in individuals in their memory, speech, language, and hearing portions of the brain. So like this whole side of the brain, plus the memory part, which is like deep in the center core of the brain, there's a significant reduction by as much as 40%. Makes a lot of sense. When they do post-mortem studies, the brains of people with hearing loss look a lot more like the brains of people with dementia than they do for normal brains. And if you haven't seen a brain on dementia, they're significantly smaller. They're like a shrunken brain. So here's the third one, cognitive overload. With hearing loss, we work really hard to fill in the missing pieces. And so I joked before about the patient who says, let me put my glasses on so I can hear you better. But that's true. When you lose one sense, another one tries to make up for it. You've always heard that. And it's real. There's real neurologic, physiological evidence for this. That the connections in the brain, other areas of the brain try to take over. They try to help. But that's a lot of stress. It's a lot of strain on the brain. Is there research to back it up? This is about 1 or 2 years old. 2 years old. The effects of hearing loss and cognitive load on speech recognition with competing talkers. Again, thank you, Mr. Scientist, for not actually telling me what the study's about. Basically, what this study says is that, yes, there's a lot more mental effort that goes into hearing when there's background noise. So remember, right, so for all the people, you know who you are, that raised your hand and said, I'm having difficulty in a crowded room, was it always like that? Yeah. Like my wife, when we go out to dinner, she's great. She hears everything I say. She also hears everything that the table over there says and everything that the table over there says. She's great at it. And Elaine in the back, who's my mother-in-law, she's great at it too. I think it's just in the family. But I know my wife's not ignoring me, so it doesn't make me mad. It's just funny how I could be in the middle of a story and she'll be like, wait a second, I got to tell you what they just said, right? You can't do that with hearing loss. It's hard enough to focus on the person right across from you, let alone eavesdrop on other conversations. And once the background noise really becomes high, now you're basically sitting there by yourself. And so what do people tend to do? And I think you could probably attest to this. You start opting to not go out. You go out less. I don't want to go out at 6 o'clock. I want to go out at 3:30 because there's nobody else in the restaurant. Except your friends look at you like, I don't think I want to go to the Blue Plate special. I'd like to go out at 6, right? And so you're like, okay, well, you go without me, right? I have patients who have told me for the last 30 years, I've been meeting up with my college buddies at the diner every last Thursday of the month, and now I don't go anymore because I'm a pain in the butt. I'm sick of asking them to repeat themselves. I feel like I'm just not part of the conversation anymore. And then I have patients who tell me that their spouse is basically their interpreter, right? You go to the movies and every 2 seconds, what'd they say? What'd they say? What'd they say? Right? Your hearing loss doesn't just impact you, it impacts everybody around you. So I want to try something with you. Try to read this sentence to yourself. Just go through it. We all think we got it? Okay, would you agree that it took a little bit longer to figure out, right? Because there's missing pieces. But 5 minutes ago, I told you age-related hearing loss, you're actually missing the consonants. So here I've taken out the vowels. So this is not age-related hearing loss. You want to see what this looks like with age-related hearing loss? And every patient I show it to says to me, no, it's not that hard. You're exaggerating. Let me put you in my booth. Let me take away visual cues, take away context, and I guarantee you, you'll probably miss 40% of the words. Because now you don't know what word is coming. Now you're just relying on your ears. So I can prove to you how hard you're actually working to hear a conversation, because you're filling in the missing pieces. And so this is really what people with mild age-related hearing loss hear, but they fill in the missing pieces, right? And here's the full sentence. Dear Karen, how's everything? Meet me for lunch tomorrow at McDonald's. Love, Howard, right? So it gets really hard. You're constantly trying to fill in the missing pieces. But here's the good news. And I cover this a lot in the book. I talk about the new treatment options. So you've already heard me say this phrase, traditional hearing aids. What is the job of a traditional hearing aid? To make things louder. What is the job of new technology? So there's neurotechnology that was specifically designed with the brain in mind, specifically designed to treat the cognitive aspects of hearing loss. And what we now know is that there are 4 scientific findings that show this new technology is significantly better than old technology and works really hard at keeping the brain stimulated. So let's review these 4. And I tell every patient that walks into me, we're not having a conversation about what color or what size. We're having a conversation about you have hearing loss, we're dealing with cognitive deprivation, and we need to start to treat it as soon as possible. And there are 4 reasons why I need to treat it. The first one is, we now know that with the medical treatment of hearing loss, you will find improvements in quality of life. There's improvements of relationships at home, so no more husband and wife fighting over the volume of the TV, or trying to interpret, or can you help me, what'd they say, what, huh? And there's improvements in self-esteem, which was told to us right at the beginning of the talk. I'm happier now. I feel better now because I'm part of the conversation, right? So there's one reason you need to treat your hearing loss. Here's reason number 2, increased cognitive function. Yes, by treating hearing loss, you are improving brain activity. And so there was a study done, University of Texas, El Paso. It was done about a year ago. Super easy, super simple study. They took a group of people between 55 and 65 years old. They had mild age-related hearing loss. They tested all of them. They tested cognitive function. Okay, half of them did nothing. The other half started treating their hearing loss. The group that started treating their hearing loss only after 2 weeks had significant improvements in selective attention, memory recall, and processing speed. So when you treat your hearing loss, you're actually smarter than your friends. Proof. These are real, all right, maybe they didn't say that in the study. Okay, I'll be honest with you. They didn't say that. But they did say, and not just the average, all 20 of the subjects showed a significant improvement in all 3 of these cognitive areas. So, here's the third one. Provide proper stimulation to the brain. So it's not about just making things louder. It's not about treating the ear. It's about treating the brain. And so what we have here is an image of this new technology that might look on the surface like a traditional hearing aid. But when you compare this technology to a traditional hearing aid, it's 30% better at hearing speech and background noise. It's been shown to offer a 20% reduction in listening effort, so you're not working so hard to hear, and a 20% improvement in memory recall. And I want you to listen to it. I have a sound sample. This is why I was working so hard at setting up the sound before, and hopefully it works. So in this scenario, I'm going to play for you what it's like to have a mild hearing loss in this noisy cafe. So hopefully this works. Let me. All right. So listen up, okay? I want you to listen and see if you can focus in on what the man is saying. Did you catch all that? Okay. Let's do the exact same sample played through new technology.
I'm really glad we came to this restaurant. It's always been one of my favorites. The desserts are amazing.
Wow. Do you hear a difference? Yeah. Was it perfect? No, but that's just because the volume is pretty low. Okay, so I want to do it again so you don't feel like there's parlor tricks here, right? I just wanted to make the volume louder.
I'm really glad we came to this restaurant. It's always been one of my favorites. The desserts are amazing.
So that's without treatment, and here's what it sounds like with the new technology.
I'm really glad we came to this restaurant. It's always been one of my favorites. The desserts are amazing.
So, did you notice a difference? About 10 years ago, Bose came out with noise-canceling technology. And you got to wear big, clunky headphones to get it. They finally shrunk down that technology so that it fits in this tiny piece of technology that sits discreetly right behind your ear. And it's actually filtering. It's sampling background noise 100 times a second, sampling it and turning it down, and enhancing speech at the same time. And so it's a much more realistic, much more natural. And I can tell you that 9 out of 10 patients will come to me unsolicited and will tell me it sounds natural. It reminds me of what it was like hearing when I was 20 years old. So I'll never ask, does it sound natural? Because I don't want to ask that. But it was like this, and this started about 1.5 years ago. And then we did a study on it, showed that there's a 97% patient satisfaction rating. I mean, it's really incredible how this has revolutionized the treatment of hearing loss. And the fourth and final one that I'm surprised you didn't ask yet, but maybe you were asking in your brain. So if hearing loss increases my risk of developing dementia, what happens if I treat my hearing loss? Can I reduce my risk? And the answer is a resounding yes. And so here are 2 things I want to show you. So a colleague of mine, somebody in the field, Dr. Doraiswamy from Duke University, he was comparing the medical treatment of hearing loss versus taking memory-enhancing pills. And here's his quote: "The benefits of correcting hearing loss on cognition are twice as large as the benefits from any cognitive enhancing drugs now on the market. It, hearing loss, should be the first thing we focus on. It's a real powerful statement. And it was backed up by the European Dementia Commission, which found two amazing things. One, 35% of dementia cases are considered preventable. Isn't that scary? If I filled this room with 100 people that have dementia, 35 of them didn't have to be here. How do you become one of the 35? That's the question everybody's asking. How do I prevent it? How do I become part of that group that's not going to suffer from dementia? And there are, I just forgot, there are 10 lifestyle factors that the European Dementia Commission listed. The number one most modifiable factor was the early treatment of hearing loss. You should also reduce hypertension, obesity, depression, diabetes, increase education, physical activity, and social contact. Add up all 9 of these, and it's not as, I forgot I wasn't supposed to touch the screen. Add up, I'm just going to leave it there. Add up all 9 of them, and they're not as powerful as the early treatment of hearing loss at reducing your risk of developing dementia. So, I guess I have to. What do we do about it today, right? Because I travel the country and I give people information, and I want to make sure that I don't paralyze you with too much information, and now you don't know what to do. So here's what I tell people. First, schedule an appointment with a hearing care professional who thinks brain first, who's not just thinking about traditional hearing aids, who's not thinking about making things louder, somebody who understands the brain. So my entire staff, myself and my other doctors of audiology, are all trained and certified by the American Brain Council. We are all dementia prevention educators. So we've all been certified. I'm going to be honest with you, we are the only ones in New England who are actually certified. So we understand the connections of the brain. We understand how important it is to prevent dementia and everything that goes into that. In fact, somewhere around here is actually one of the short quizzes that we have that will sort of highlight for you if you are at an increased risk of developing dementia. And we will review that with you in detail at your appointment. And then my other bit of advice is be ready. Be ready for the appointment. Be ready to take the next step. And I believe that this book, the reason I wrote this book was so that when you go into the doctor's office, you are armed with education. It is the most important thing I can give you. It's the most important thing you can give yourself when dealing with any medical condition is education. And so that's what the book is for. Take a copy for you. I've got 40 of them, if not more. Take extra copies. If I leave here with none of them, I'm happy because I want you to help me spread the word about treatment. It's really important. So I'll leave you with my final take-home message. I show this at the end of every talk. Aging is inevitable, but decline is optional. So which do you choose? The fact that you took time out of your life to be here on a Thursday night, to come to the Southborough Library and listen to me for about an hour, I already know what you choose. So I thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. So. Thank you. Yes?
I have a couple of questions.
You only get one.
It's okay.
So your group, I assume, is not product specific. You're not. What is the product that Bose has built that the hearing aid sounded like a noise cancellation?
So what I was referring to? So I was just talking about the over-the-ear headphones to listen to music and reduce background noise.
Okay,
That's what they've created.
as an example.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just using that as an example. Yep,
Okay.
that's it.
So your practice would have a blend of treatments and technology.
Exactly. And so people will ask me all the time, especially over the internet or Facebook, like, hey, what's this going to cost? And what? Well, I don't know. I can't diagnose you over Facebook, and I certainly can't give you a medical recommendation over Facebook. And so we have to have a conversation. I have to understand your symptoms, and then you have to be put through It's about a 35-minute diagnostic evaluation. It's a very thorough evaluation, no screenings. So please, if you ever get an advertisement for come in for a hearing screening, like, don't waste your time. You need a thorough evaluation so that a doctor can make a recommendation on what to do next. So, yeah.
A friend of mine is a huge fan of AURAL, A-U-R-A-L, I think it's spelled, rehabilitation.
Sure.
I took a LACE program, you've probably heard of that, but she's a huge fan.
So oral rehabilitation, and she spelled it out A-U-R-A-L, so we're talking about, you know, oral listening, not oral, I should say oral listening. That's part of our treatment program, is it's not, here's a widget, see you later. There's an entire program, because your brain, we're bringing your brain back online, and you can't turn it all on day one. So we slowly bring you through the process. There's a whole series of things that will take several appointments to cover. And so yes, we include oral rehabilitation with all of our treatment programs. And then there's some where you can actually register for oral rehabilitation classes in certain places, but oftentimes that's not necessary if it's included with the treatment program, and it is at our practice. So, yeah. Any other questions, or yes?
Are the main things of Medicare and Medicaid picking up any of these costs?
No, don't be silly. No, but I have a few posters. We can go marching on Washington tomorrow if you'd like, because Medicaid won't touch it. Why not? What's the fastest growing population in our country? Seniors. Every senior is going to have hearing loss. Medicaid would go broke overnight. And so their idea is, nope, don't want to touch it. However, what we're trying to convince the politicians and the people at Medicaid is, by the way, do you know how much it costs to care for a loved one with dementia? Any guesses? $57,000 a year. That is the average annual cost to a family to care for a loved one living with dementia. Whereas you can treat your hearing loss and potentially prevent dementia for $175 a month. I mean, to me, it doesn't make any sense. Will it change? Yes. Will Medicaid listen? Yes. When? I'm not waiting around, right? I don't know that it'll be during my lifetime, because there's a really strong lobby to not include hearing healthcare. I have no idea who the genius was who thought eyes, ears, and teeth deserve their own insurance plan. They're not really part of the body. Doesn't make any sense, right? But we can sit around and get mad about it, which we should be mad about it, but at the same time, you have to take action. That's no reason to not take action. So, yeah, thank you for the question. Any other questions? No? I already answered them all, right? Yes?
What made you get interested in all of this?
The truth? The absolute truth is I was looking for a major, and at first I thought I wanted to do social work because I wanted to work with people. And actually a lot of what I do is counseling. The majority of what I do is counseling. But while I was enrolled in my undergrad program, I thought I wanted to do social work until in Social Work 101, my professor said, if you want to be a social worker, you have to go to grad school. Now, I got kicked out of high school twice. So the last thing I wanted to do when I got into college was go any longer than 4 years. So I said, no, I'm not doing social work. So my mother said, hey, Keith, speech pathology and audiology, they're listed from the World News and Reports as like the kind of job you'll have forever. And they need males, and why don't you go look into it? I do what my mother tells me. So I took a class, an introduction to communication disorders, and I fell in love with it. And then I took my hearing classes, and I fell further in love with it. Next thing you know, I finished my master's program. Next thing you know, I went back and got a doctorate, which took 6 years. I was in college for 12 years. And only because my wife was like, enough's enough, grow up. right, did I stop. But really, I'm still teaching and educating because I found something that I was passionate about, and I never thought twice about I'm still in school. Like, it was just something that I fell in love with. So that's my honest story. It wasn't, some people will have that story of I know somebody with hearing loss. I didn't have that. My grandmother was going through once I already decided to go into this. But yeah, that's, my mother told me to. Yeah. Yes.
At the beginning, I mentioned a bad audiologist, and so I went to a good audiologist. Is there anything in your practice or in the educational field of your field that can educate audiologists to be the good audiologists?
There's good doctors, there's bad doctors. There's good mechanics and there's bad mechanics, right? I love this joke. Do you know what they call the guy who graduates last in his medical doctor school? Doctor, right? It's just the way it is. And so what we've been doing is we actually have a program called Excellence in Audiology where we are traveling the country and we are recruiting members, but they're only the top. We're talking that probably the top 10 to 20% of audiology practices around the country that are the good ones. And the ones that are the bad ones that want training, that's why I travel every other week. I've been gone for the last couple of months every other week, traveling, training more audiologists to get over to the good side. And so what you didn't ask, but I'll answer it anyway, is how do you find a good one versus a bad one? Because somebody here said, I don't know where to start. And while this may seem crazy, to me it's almost as simple as if you don't know somebody who's gotten treatment from somewhere, go to the Google. Just put in audiology, put in hearing aids, and see what comes up. I am over the moon that my practice on Google alone has over 75 five-star reviews. One of the next closest has like 3 or 4. That to me, a patient took the time out of their schedule, out of their life to go online and 30 more on Facebook, 10 more on Yelp. So there's a website called healthyhearing.com where you can find providers in the area and they're all rated and we're always at the top. So there are resources out there, but if you know somebody that maybe is out closer to Boston, I would say word of mouth is always good. Ask your physician and look on the Google. So, yeah. Any other questions? Or I really appreciate your time. I did ask Elaine to come with me, not only to help lug everything, but also because there are typically people who are looking for appointments. So I asked her earlier, put aside a few appointments. If there are people here that are interested, we can get them signed up tonight. If not, that's okay. You have our phone number. Just all I ask is that you take action. If this is something you're worried about, do something about it somewhere, somehow. Find somebody good and start treatment as soon as possible. And we'll give out copies of the book, and I guess we all go home now. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.